The barn was on fire, not smoldering, not starting. Already gone, walls catching, roof beginning to bow, heat rolling across the yard in visible waves. And the door was barred from the outside. Someone had put that bar there. Someone with 2 hands and a reason. Eli Sharp hit the beam at full speed. Once, twice, the wood gave. Smoke poured out like a living thing. He went in anyway, into the black, into the roar of it, calling a name the fire was trying to swallow. New Mexico Territory, 1883. A land where a man could disappear and nobody would come looking. Where 3 riders could take a woman from open ground and call it their right. Where the only thing standing between what's wrong and what's done about it is whether one man decides to walk out of the trees. He almost didn't. The fence post went in crooked. Eli Sharp looked at it for a long moment, then drove it in again. Harder this time. The mallet came down twice, 3 times 4. The wood bit into the dry New Mexico ground and held. Good enough. He stepped back, wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist and looked out across the land. Red earth, scrub brush, the mountains sitting low and blue on the horizon like they'd always been there and always would be. Which they had, which they would. He picked up the mallet and moved down the line. This was the work. This was the day. Fence posts and water troughs and feed buckets, and then, if the light held, maybe a look at the north pasture where the soil had been going soft near the creek bed. Practical things, physical things, things that asked nothing from him except the use of his hands. Eli Sharp was very good at practical things now. The cabin sat 40 yards behind him, small and square and bleached by 3 summers of sun. A good structure. Solid roof. 2 windows facing east, 1 facing south. He'd built the south-facing one himself the winter after the first winter. Gave himself something to do with his hands when the evenings got long. Inside, on the kitchen table, there was a bottle of rye whiskey. Unopened. He'd bought it 4 months ago in Abilene when he rode through for grain, set it on the table when he got home. And there it sat. He wasn't sure what he was proving, wasn't sure it mattered. On the mantel above the fireplace, a frame lay face down. He knew what was in it. He didn't need to see it to know. Sarah in her blue dress, standing in front of the cottonwood tree that used to grow near the Hatch property. Clara in her arms. Clara couldn't have been more than 6 months old when that photograph was taken. She looked confused by the whole thing. The camera, the stillness required. She was always moving, even then. Even at 6 months old, he drove another post in. Good enough. Move on. The horses knew something was wrong before he did. He was filling the water trough near the east fence line when the bay mare, a steady animal, 12 years old, not much startled her anymore, lifted her head and went rigid. Ears forward, nostrils wide, her eyes tracking something downhill toward the tree line along the creek. Eli set down the bucket. He didn't reach for the rifle right away. He listened first. That was something the war had taught him and that ranching had kept sharp. Listen before you move. Because the thing making noise is rarely the thing that will hurt you. It's the thing that went quiet that you want to find. The creek was about a 1/4 mile down the slope. Cottonwoods and scrub willow along the bank, dense enough to hide in. The ground between here and there was open, dry grass, a few boulders left by whatever water had carved this valley 10,000 years ago. He heard voices, men's voices, more than one, and then something else, lower, a sound that wasn't a voice exactly. More like a sound a person makes when they've decided not to make sounds anymore. Controlled, deliberate, the kind of quiet that takes more effort than crying does. Eli went to the fence, unhooked the rifle from the saddle scabbard on the bay and walked down the slope. He stopped at the tree line and looked through the branches. 3 men on horseback, circling slow, the way dogs circle something they've already decided to hurt. A woman on her knees at the water's edge, hands bound behind her back with rope, her head down, dark hair falling forward, hiding her face. A cut above her eyebrow. He could see the blood from here, a dark line tracking down toward her jaw. The man doing most of the talking was stocky, red-faced, with a yellow kerchief around his neck. That was Dutch. Eli didn't know his full name yet, didn't need it. He'd seen Dutch's type before, loud when safe, quiet when facing something bigger. The second man was younger, thin, sat his horse badly like he'd rather be somewhere else. That one was Fen. He wasn't leading anything. He was following, because following was what he did. The third man hadn't moved since Eli arrived at the tree line. He sat very still on a gray horse at the far edge of the group, a tall man, maybe 45. A long coat despite the heat, His hands rested on the saddle horn and his face held no expression at all. Not boredom, not pleasure, not impatience, nothing, like watching a cliff face. That was Dade Cutter. Eli didn't know his name yet either. But he knew the type in a different way. The loud ones were predictable, the still ones were not. Dutch yanked the rope. The woman's shoulders jerked back, but she didn't cry out, didn't beg. She just found her footing on the wet bank and held herself there, breathing through her nose, steady, like the rope and Dutch and the creek and the whole situation were things she was simply waiting out. That was what stopped Eli's feet, not the blood, not the rope, not the 3 armed men, the patience of her. He'd seen people afraid before. He'd seen them hold it together, and he'd seen them fall apart, and he'd seen everything between. But this woman wasn't holding it together, the way frightened people hold it together, white-knuckled and braced for impact. She was doing something else. She was waiting, calculating, watching for the moment whenever it came. Eli almost turned around. He would think about that later, the almost. He was 50 yards uphill with a clear line of retreat and 3 men between him and any obligation. She wasn't his family, she wasn't his neighbor, she wasn't anybody he knew. And he had a rule, a quiet, unspoken rule he'd been keeping for 3 years, about not inserting himself into things. The rule had served him well. The rule kept things manageable. The rule was why he was still standing upright in the world. Dutch raised the whip. The woman turned her head, not toward Dutch, not toward the whip. She turned her head uphill, toward the tree line, toward the spot where Eli was standing in the shadow of the cottonwoods. She couldn't have seen him. The light was behind him and he was still, and she was 40 yards away and half blinded by blood. She couldn't have seen him, but her eyes went exactly to where he was, and held there, not pleading, not desperate. Just looking the way you look at something when you already know what it is, and you're waiting to find out what it'll do. Eli Sharp stepped out of the tree line. That's close enough. The voice came from the still man on the gray horse. Low, flat, not a threat, just a fact being stated. Eli stopped about 10 feet from the edge of the group. He held the rifle loose across his body. Not aimed, not lowered. Dutch wheeled his horse around. The hell are you doing here? Checking my waterline. Eli kept his voice easy. You're standing on my property. That was a lie. The creek ran through open range, but the lie had the right weight to it. Dutch looked at the woman, then back at Eli. This is private business. Looks like public business to me. She's ours. We found her 3 days ago out past the Dolan Cut. She's got no papers, no deed, nothing. She belongs to us now. Eli looked at the woman for the first time directly. The cut above her eye was still seeping. Her wrists were raw where the rope had been, but she was looking at him the same way she'd been looking at him from 40 yards, steady, unreadable, waiting to see. She got a name? Dutch made a dismissive gesture. Hell if I know, she doesn't talk. Eli kept his eyes on the woman. Is that right? A pause, a long one. Then her voice came through, hoarse and dry like it hadn't been used in days. My name is Nalin. Quiet. Sure, like saying her own name out loud was an act she'd chosen carefully. Dutch's face went red. Nobody said you could. The rifle cracked, not aimed at any of them. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 inches from Dutch's boot. Close enough that his horse skidded sideways and Dutch grabbed for the reins. Everyone went still. The still man on the gray horse hadn't moved. His hand was near his holster but not on it. His eyes were on Eli. Measuring your business here is finished, Eli said. You've got no right. I've got a rifle and you're on my waterline. A beat. That's right enough. The still man looked at Eli for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman. Then he looked at the land around them, slow and thorough like he was reading a map. Then he turned his horse. Let's go, he said. Quiet, no argument in it. Fen went immediately. Didn't look back. Dutch sputtered and spat in the woman's direction and yanked his horse around and rode hard to catch up. Eli watched until they cleared the ridge and disappeared. Then he lowered the rifle. Then he let out the breath he'd been holding for the last 4 minutes. He cut the rope with his belt knife. Came around behind her, moved slow, made sure she could hear him before he got close. The rope parted on the second stroke. Her hands came forward. She brought them around herself with that same deliberate patience. Like even the relief of it was something she was controlling. The bruising on her wrists was deep, purple-black, several days old, some of it. She flexed her fingers one at a time. Can you stand? She stood, not smoothly, she favored her left side, but she stood without help and without asking for any. Eli looked her over the way he used to look over patients before he stopped being that. Wrists bad but functional. The cut on her forehead had mostly clotted. Moving okay on the left side, despite the favoring, probably bruised ribs, not broken. She was tall, broader through the shoulder than most men he knew. And she was looking at him the same way she'd been looking at him from the moment she'd turned her head toward the cottonwoods. Like she was still deciding, "You hurt anywhere else?" Nothing that won't close. Her English was clear. A slight flatness to some of the vowels that he couldn't place immediately. "You got somewhere to go?" She looked at him, just looked. "No," she said. He'd known that was coming. He'd known it the moment he fired that warning shot. If he was being honest, which he generally tried not to be when it was inconvenient. "My ranch is up the hill, 2 miles west." He picked up the rifle, water, food, somewhere to rest. "That's what I'm offering." Why? Not suspicious, not hostile. Just the word, flat and direct. An honest question, expecting an honest answer. He could have given her the easy version, the decent man version. The one about not riding past people who needed help. Instead, he said, "I don't know yet." She held his gaze for another moment, then she nodded, once, like that was actually an acceptable answer. Maybe a better one than the other kind. She didn't take his hand to get up on the horse. She just gripped the saddle horn and swung up behind him in one movement, clean and efficient, like she'd done it 1,000 times. The bay mare shifted under the added weight and then settled. Nalin sat behind him at a careful distance, present but contained, not leaning. They rode in silence for a while. The land stretched out around them in the late afternoon light, red and gold and enormous. The mountains had gone darker on the horizon. Somewhere to the north, a hawk was working a thermal, spiraling up in slow arcs. After a while she said, "Those men will come back, maybe, not maybe." He thought about that. "No, not maybe. You should have left me, probably." A pause. "That was your land?" "No." Another pause. "Longer, so you lied." "I did." He heard something behind him that might have been the beginning of a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything. Just a small exhalation that carried more weight than it should have. They crested the hill, and the ranch came into view. Small, a cabin, a barn, a corral with 5 horses, the beginnings of a kitchen garden that hadn't entirely failed. 3 years of work, every post, every stone, every board fitted by hands that needed something to do. She was quiet for a moment, looking at it. "Then you live here alone?" "I do, since." Not a question exactly. 3 years, he said. She didn't ask what had happened 3 years ago. She didn't fill in the silence with anything. She just let it sit there, which was its own kind of acknowledgement, the kind that didn't require you to say anything back. He gave her the barn. She went in without comment. She looked around the space in a methodical way, checked both exits, noted the pitchfork near the center post, moved the cot so that she could see the door from where she'd be lying. She did all of this without self-consciousness, without explaining herself. He brought water and food and bandages, set them on the crate near the cot, and stepped back. "I'll be in the cabin if you need anything." She was looking at the bundle of supplies. Her back was to him. "Wait," he stopped. "You haven't told me why you did it." He thought about what he'd said down at the creek. "I don't know yet," and whether that was still true or whether some answer had formed in the time since. 3 years ago, he said, "My wife and daughter were on the road to Hatch. Wheel came off the wagon. They were stuck in the heat for 6 hours." He kept his voice level. He'd said it enough times in his own head that the words came out smooth. 4 riders passed them. Not one stopped. By the time I found them, Clara was already unconscious. He paused. She was 14 months old. She died 2 days later. Sarah followed a week after. The barn was quiet. The horses shifted in the stalls. "I can't fix that," he said, "but I can make sure I'm not the rider that keeps going." Nalin didn't say anything for a moment. Then, without turning around, "I'm sorry about your daughter, and your wife," said plainly. "No performance in it." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. He was at the barn door when she spoke again. "My father was Apache," she said. "My mother was from a family in Tennessee, which means I have belonged fully to no one." A pause. Too Apache for the settlers, too white for the band, always standing between 2 things, never inside either one. He turned around. She was still facing the cot, not looking at him, but not done. "My father died 2 years ago. After that, the men at the trading post where we lived started seeing me differently. Like the thing keeping me safe had been removed." She pulled the blanket over her legs. "I left, have been moving since. Those 3 men today were hired. Not random. She turned her head just slightly. The man on the grey horse, Dade Cutter, I know that name. He's a bounty hunter out of the territory. Eli felt something shift in the back of his mind. Careful. Not yet. Let her finish. Someone paid him to find me. She reached into the front of her jacket and withdrew a piece of paper. Folded twice, worn at the creases, she held it out toward him without turning fully around. He crossed the barn and took it. He unfolded it. He didn't move for a long time after reading it. The name on the paper was Harlan Greer. He knew that name the way you know the name of a place where something bad happened to you. Not the first thought in the morning. Not the thing you talked about. But something that had been sitting behind everything else for 3 years, patient and permanent. Harlan Greer was a merchant out of Abilene, owned the largest dry goods concern in the Southern Territory. He supplied most of the small towns between Albuquerque and the Texas line. Medicines, grain, dry goods. 3 years ago in August, when the fever swept through the valley and Eli had ridden to Abilene in 2 days with a list of what he needed, Greer had looked at his list and looked at his payment and said the numbers didn't work. Could come up maybe half. Which half did he want? Eli had stood there in that store and looked at the man and said he needed all of it. He had a wife and a 14-month-old daughter and a fever he could identify and treat if he had what was on that list. Greer had shrugged. The numbers didn't work. He'd taken what he could afford and ridden home, and it hadn't been enough. 3 years of fence posts and water troughs and the bottle on the table and the face-down photograph. 3 years of practical things. And here was the name, in ink, on a piece of worn paper, that an Apache woman had been carrying in her jacket pocket, while 3 hired men dragged her through the New Mexico brush. He folded the paper, looked up. Naylin was watching him now, directly. Her dark eyes had not left his face. You know that name, she said. Not a question. Yes, how, he told her. Short sentences, not dramatic. Just the facts laid out in order the way you'd describe terrain to someone who needed to cross it. The fever. The list, the store, the numbers that didn't work, the ride home, the days that followed. When he was done, the barn was quiet again. He's the one who has Cutter looking for me, Nahlin said. I have papers, documents my father kept. Records that show Greer's men contaminated a well near an Apache settlement and blamed the band for sickness that spread to a settler camp afterward. 15 people died. My father's people were pushed off their land because of it. She was very still. Those papers prove it was Greer's operation. His men, his order. Eli looked at the piece of paper in his hand, the same man. He and this woman, who he'd met 40 minutes ago at a creek, whose name he'd first heard her say in a hoarse voice after days of silence, had been led to each other by the same man who had never met either of them and had never lost a night's sleep over what he'd done to them. The world was occasionally that narrow. Greer wants the documents destroyed, Nahlin said. And me with them. Where are the documents? She touched the jacket again. Here, some of them. The rest are safe. He thought about Dade Cutter sitting very still on the grey horse, reading the landscape. A patient man. A professional man. He thought about Dutch's face when the bullet hit the dirt near his boot. The anger there, the wounded pride. He thought about the way Nahlin had made 3 men leave without giving them anything. Just her refusal to break. Get some sleep, he said. He turned toward the door. Ellie Sharp, Nahlin said. He stopped. She'd heard his name when he hadn't told her. She must have heard Dutch say it. Dutch, who'd clearly crossed paths with him before, who'd been following him enough to know his name. Smart, she'd been listening from the moment she was captured, filing things away. I don't trust people, she said, flat. Not apologetic, in case that wasn't clear. It was clear, but I don't think you're going to hurt me. I'm not, I know, a beat. That's the only reason I'm still here. He went back to the cabin. Leaned against the closed door for a moment in the dark. The lamp was on the table next to the bottle of rye. He lit it and looked at the paper with Greer's name on it, and thought about how strange a thing it was. To have 3 years of deliberate numbness cracked open by 40 minutes at a creek. Not healed. Don't get ahead of yourself. Cracked open. He reached for the lamp and then stopped and looked at the bottle of rye. Unopened. 4 months he left it that way. He moved to the window. Through the dusty glass he could see the barn. No light inside. She was already resting, or trying to. He wondered how long it had been since she'd felt safe enough to actually close her eyes. He turned away from the window and began checking the rifles. The next morning she was up before him. He came out of the cabin at first light and found her already at the water trough, washing her face. She'd rewrapped the bandage on her wrist herself. Her hair was braided back. She looked at him the same way she'd looked at him last night, assessing, not unfriendly, not warm either. "There's coffee," he said. She nodded. They drank it on separate sides of the porch without saying anything for a while. The sun came up over the eastern ridge, and the land went from grey to gold in about 10 minutes the way it always did out here, too fast to feel gradual. He noticed she checked the ridge 3 times while they were drinking their coffee. "Can you work a hammer?" he asked. "Yes, north fence needs posts. Rotted through in 3 places." She set down the tin cup and stood up. They walked to the north fence line and got to work. She didn't ask where to start. She looked at the fence, identified the worst posts, and started digging without being told. He pulled the old posts while she set the holes and tamped the new ones in. Strong, efficient. She didn't labor dramatically or make noise. She worked the way people work who have been working all their lives and know how to pace themselves. They did 6 posts before the sun got high enough to be punishing. "You learned this from your father?" he asked, passing her water. "Some." She drank and handed it back. "My mother's people used their hands. Everyone worked. If you didn't work, the camp didn't run. It wasn't about strength." She considered. "It was about being useful. And your father, he taught me to read tracks, to listen to land." She looked out across the pasture. "He said the land speaks, but it speaks quietly. Most people are too loud to hear." Eli thought about that. Thought about how loud he'd been those first months after Clara and Sarah. Not with noise, but with the constant roar of trying not to feel anything, which was its own kind of loud. "He was right," he said. She glanced at him. It wasn't a significant glance, but it was a noticing one. They went back to the fence. That was when she saw the rider on the ridge. "Stop," she said. Her voice was low and even, no panic. Like she was telling him the post was crooked. Eli straightened and turned slowly. East near a rider, sitting still the way still men sit. "It's Cutter," she said. "Yes, he's not coming down, not yet. He's counting the horses, looking at the water situation, checking exit points." She didn't take her eyes off the ridge. "He'll come tonight or tomorrow. He won't come with all 3. Dutch is angry and Fen is nervous. Angry men and nervous men make mistakes, so Cutter comes alone, to talk first." She paused. "That's who he is. He likes to give people a chance to make the smart choice." Eli looked at the rider on the ridge. The rider looked back, a long moment of perfect stillness between them, 500 yards of dry air and hot light. Then the rider turned and disappeared behind the ridge line. Eli let out a slow breath. "The barn," Nayland said. "If he comes tonight, I need a clear shot from the loft at the front of the yard. There's a Winchester under the cot. Already loaded." She looked at him. "I put it there this morning," he said, "before coffee." Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise. Something more like recalibration. The way a person adjusts their read of someone when the evidence changes. "You were expecting this," she said. "I was expecting something." He picked up the mallet again. "I've had enough of surprises." They stood there for a moment, the 2 of them, in the middle of the New Mexico heat with a fence half fixed and a rider just gone off the ridge. Then Nalin picked up her shovel. "4 more posts," she said. "4 more posts," he agreed, and they went back to work. The traps went in before sunrise. Nayland moved through the dark like she'd been born knowing where the ground was soft and where it held. No lamp, just the stars and whatever internal map she carried. Eli followed 6 feet behind her and tried not to trip over anything that would embarrass him. She set the first line along the east approach. Thin cord strung between 2 scrub oak trunks at ankle height with 3 tin cups knotted along it. Simple, ugly. Effective. "Anyone comes from that direction," she said. "They'll hear it before you do. And if they're careful." Careful men make different sounds than careless men. She moved to the next position. "I'll still hear it." He believed her. The second line went across the back of the barn. The third at the gap in the north fence where the ground was hard enough to hold a boot print. She used wire for that one. Rigged it so the tension would carry through 20 feet of fence line and rattle the whole thing. By the time they were done, the sky had gone grey at the edges. They stood in the yard and looked at what they'd built. Or rather, she stood and looked. Eli stood and tried to see what she was seeing, which was a different thing entirely. "It's not enough," she said. "No, but it's something, it's something." She turned back toward the barn. He turned back toward the cabin. They went to their respective corners of the property like two people who had silently agreed on the rules of a shared space without ever discussing them. Which was, Eli thought, the most comfortable he'd been in 3 years. He didn't know what to do with that information. So he made coffee. Cutter came back on the second day, not at night, not with Dutch and Fen flanking him. He came at mid-morning, alone, riding easy down the slope from the north, like he was visiting a neighbor, like this was a social call. He stopped at the edge of the yard and sat his horse without coming closer. Eli was at the well. He kept his hands on the rope and didn't reach for the rifle, made himself stand still and wait. "Morning," Cutter said. "Morning." Cutter looked at the barn, then the cabin, then the pasture where Eli's horses were, patient, methodical, pricing everything. "I'll be direct," Cutter said. "Go ahead. I've got a contract. The woman in your barn is part of it. You let her come with me now. No fuss, I walk away. You keep your horses and your fence and your water line." He settled his hands on the saddle horn. Everyone makes the smart choice. Eli looked at him. Just looked. "She's not in my barn," he said. A pause. "Mr. Sharp, she's on my property, which makes her under my protection." He let that land. Same as any man or woman who comes to this ranch. Cutter's expression didn't change. Nothing about Cutter changed, but something behind his eyes did a small, almost invisible thing, like a calculation being updated. "That's an expensive position to hold," Cutter said. "I've held more expensive ones." Cutter looked at him for another long moment. Then he looked at the barn again, then back at Eli. "The people I work for have long patience," he said. "I want you to understand that. I understand it fine." Another pause, longer this time. "You know her name," Cutter said. "Did she tell you who hired me?" "She told me some things." Harlan Greer, flat, informational, like he was reading it off a page. "He's not a man who lets things go. I want you to understand the weight of what you're choosing." "I understand the weight." Cutter looked at him. Something moved through the stillness of that man's face. Not respect exactly. Something more complicated than respect. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who has seen his own stubbornness in a stranger's face before. He turned his horse. "I'll be back," he said. "I know." Cutter rode back up the north slope and disappeared over the ridge. Eli stood at the well and let his heartbeat come back to something normal. Then he turned around and looked at the barn loft, where Nalin was crouched behind the hay bales with the Winchester aimed at the place Cutter had been standing. She'd had a clear shot the whole time. She lowered the rifle. "He knew I was up here," she said. "Yes, he came anyway. He wanted to see what you'd do." She was quiet for a moment. "He's not afraid of dying." "No, I don't think he is." She came down from the loft, carried the rifle with the kind of ease that meant she'd been holding a rifle for most of her life, stood in the barn doorway and looked at the empty ridge. "He said Greer's name," she said. "He did. He didn't have to do that." "No." She turned that over. "Why would he give us that?" "I don't know." Eli picked up the water bucket and headed back to the well. "Maybe he wanted us to know what we're dealing with, or maybe he wanted to see what we'd do with the name." He stopped, turned around. She was still looking at the ridge, and she was right. That was the other possibility. Because Cutter was a man who gave you information the way a card player shows you one card. Not because he's careless, but because he wants to know how you respond to it. "We should check the east approach," Eli said. "Already checked." She walked past him toward the cabin, cords still up. Nobody's been through. He watched her go, thought, 3 days ago this woman was kneeling at a creek with her hands tied, and now she's running point on her own defense like she'd been planning it for a week. Because she had been. He went back to the well. The thing about working alongside someone you don't quite know yet is that the work does the talking. Not in a symbolic way, in a very literal, physical way. You learn things about a person by watching them work. Whether they cut corners, whether they stay steady when something goes wrong, whether they look for the easy answer or the right one, whether they keep working when they're tired or whether they find reasons to stop. Nayland didn't find reasons to stop. Day 2, she rebuilt the section of fence he'd been avoiding for a month. The southwestern corner where the posts had heaved over winter and the wire had gone slack. She didn't announce she was doing it. He came around from the water trough and found her mid-project, already 2 posts in. He picked up the mallet and joined her. They worked through the hottest part of the afternoon without speaking. Fell into a rhythm. She'd drive the post, he'd run the wire, she'd crimp and cut, he'd move to the next position. Back and forth. like a conversation that didn't need words, which was fine. He'd forgotten that was possible, that you could be with someone without filling the air between you. Sarah had been a talker, morning to night, her mind running and her mouth keeping up. He'd loved that about her. The quiet since had been absolute. He didn't need Nalin to be Sarah, he didn't want her to be. But this particular kind of quiet, shared and purposeful, two people working toward the same thing, felt less like absence and more like something else. He couldn't name it yet, so he hammered in another post. "You were a doctor," she said, not looking up from the wire. "A long time ago, not so long, long enough." She crimped the wire and moved to the next post. "Last night, the way you checked my ribs when you thought I was asleep." He stopped. She kept working, not looking at him. "I was checking the bandage on your wrist," he said. "You were checking my ribs." A beat. "I move differently when I breathe on my left side. You noticed. You put your hand near enough to check the spacing without waking me." She glanced at him. Not accusing, just accurate. Doctor's habit. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Bruised," he said finally. "Two of them. Not broken. I know. You should tell me if it gets worse. It won't." "You don't know. It won't," she said again. Even, final, not rudeness, certainty. He dropped it, but he noticed, and she probably noticed him noticing, that for about 30 seconds back there he'd been thinking like a doctor again. Not like a man going through the motions of a day, like someone with a purpose that involved other people's welfare. The thought sat in the back of his chest like a coal that hadn't quite gone out. He hammered in another post. That night he found the tin cup on the front porch, not in the trap line, on the porch, set upright on the top step, carefully, deliberately, like a signal. He looked at it for a moment. Then he went to the barn. Nalin was awake, sitting on the cot with her back against the wall, knees up, cleaning the Winchester with a small kit she'd produced from somewhere. She looked up when he came in, didn't say anything. He held up the tin cup. "Found this on the porch." She looked at it. Something shifted in her face, not fear, alertness. Someone moved it from the east line. "When, between sunset and dark, I walked the line at sunset. Cup was in place, checked again an hour later. Gone from the line, on the porch instead." She set down the rifle. "They're telling us they can walk right up to the house," she said. "That's a message. I know what it is. Dutch," she said it without hesitation. "Cutter doesn't leave messages. He comes or he doesn't come. Dutch needs you to know how brave he is." She looked at the cup. "Which means Dutch is out there, somewhere in the dark right now, probably drunk." Eli looked out the barn door at the yard. Dark still. The moon was behind a layer of cloud that had come in after sundown. "Stay here," he said. "No." He looked at her. "Two sets of eyes are better than one." She said, "If Dutch is drunk and armed, you don't want to face that alone." He couldn't argue with either point. They went out into the dark together, no lamp, no noise, split up at the edge of the yard. She went left along the barn wall. He went right toward the corral. The horses were uneasy, moving in the corral without purpose, the way animals move when they want to be somewhere else. That was information. He eased along the fence line. The corral backed up against a rise of rock and scrub on the south side of the property. Good cover if you knew where to go. And there, between two boulders, where a man could sit and see the whole yard, was the orange ember of a cigarette. Dutch, alone, sitting in the rocks with a bottle loose in his hand and the cigarette burning down between his fingers. Not moving, not watching really, just being there, the kind of presence that isn't surveillance so much as grievance. He'd come to show himself. To say, "I can get close, I'm not done." Eli stood very still and thought about what to do, not the rifle. "Not tonight. You shoot a drunk man in the dark and you have a different set of problems tomorrow, starting with two very angry companions and a body that needed explaining." He stepped on a dry stick. Dutch's head came up. "Who's there?" Flat, aggressive. Eli stepped out from the fence line. Visible, hands at his sides. Dutch scrambled to his feet and knocked the bottle over. It didn't break. He grabbed for his pistol and got it out but didn't raise it, because Eli was standing still and unhurried, and the math of the situation didn't immediately compute as a threat. "Sharp," Dutch said. "Dutch." Dutch looked around the yard, looking for something, maybe for Nalin, maybe for Cutter, maybe for an audience. "You've got no right to what you're doing," Dutch said. His voice had the thick edge of whiskey and old anger. "She's ours. We found her." "You found a person," Eli said. "That's not the same thing. She's a woman with a name and a father who died and documents she's been carrying across the territory." He kept his voice even. That's what you found, and then you tied her wrists and dragged her to a creek because Dade Cutter told you to. Dutch's jaw worked. Go home, Eli said. You're drunk and tired and there's nothing for you here. I'm not going to shoot you tonight and you're not going to shoot me because you don't want Cutter hearing that you made a mess without him. He looked at the bottle on the ground. Pick up your bottle. Ride back to wherever you're camped. Sleep. Dutch stared at him. A long moment of nothing. The horses moved in the corral. The cigarette was on the ground now, going dark. Then Dutch grabbed the bottle and pushed past Eli's shoulder, close, aggressive, making sure there was contact, and walked toward where his horse was tied south of the property. Eli stood and listened to the hoofbeats move away. Then Nayland appeared out of the dark on his left side. Nice speech, she said. Didn't say anything that wasn't true. That's what made it a nice speech. They walked back to the barn together. Not quite side by side, close enough. The storm came in on the third night, not a lightning storm, a dry blow, hot wind off the desert that arrived in the afternoon and built through the day, driving grit under doors and making the horses pace. By evening the sky was the color of old brass and the air had that pressing, electrical feeling that meant something was coming, even if the clouds hadn't caught up to it yet. They brought the horses in together. 6 horses in a space meant for 4. The extra 2 from the north pasture because the lean-to shed wasn't built well enough to hold in a real blow. It was a tight job. The animals didn't want to cooperate. The wind was already making strange sounds in the eaves of the barn. Eli had the black gelding by the halter, and the gelding was doing that thing horses do when they don't want to go where you're pointing them, planting his feet and pulling his head back with absolute conviction. He doesn't trust the roof, Nayland said. He's met the roof before. He doesn't trust it tonight. She stepped up alongside him, said something quiet to the horse in a language Eli didn't know. Not loud, not insistent, just words at a certain pitch, a certain pace. The gelding put his ears forward. Said the words again. The gelding walked into the stall. Eli stared at the horse. What did you say to him? I told him the storm isn't in here. She moved to the next horse. Sometimes that's what you need to hear. He thought about that for longer than was probably appropriate. They got all 6 horses in, and the barn door latched, and the storm hit properly about an hour after sunset. Wind coming in hard from the west, dragging dust and scrub brush, and the particular howl that empty country makes when the weather moves through it. The barn held. It was a good barn. He'd built it to hold. They sat on opposite sides of the center aisle on upturned buckets and listened to the wind. Tell me about her, Nayland said. He looked up. Your daughter. She was looking at her hands, not at him. Clara. You said she was always moving. He hadn't said that to her. He'd said that in his own head, standing in the barn 2 days ago. But he'd probably said it out loud at some point. He did that sometimes. The walls had been his only company for a long time. He was quiet for a moment. She used to grab at everything, he said. Anytime you held her, her hands were going. Your collar, your hair, your nose, if you got close enough. He almost smiled, almost. Sarah said she was going to be trouble. The good kind. Nayland nodded. She laughed at things that weren't funny, he said. Which is its own kind of intelligence, I think. Deciding what's funny. At 14 months, he stopped. I don't talk about her, I know. It's I know, she said again. Quiet, not dismissing, just, she knew. They sat for a while with the wind making the barn walls breathe. There was a man, she said finally. He waited. From the Eastern Band, his name was Saya. She stopped, chose. He was the kind of person who noticed things. Small things. The way the light changed on the rock in the afternoon. The way the camp sounded different on the day before a move versus the day after. She paused. He saw me, not the way most people saw me. Her hands stayed still in her lap. His family would not allow it. Too much of my mother's blood. Too uncertain a lineage for his position in the band. She said it without bitterness, as fact, as something that had happened to her that she'd incorporated and moved past. He obeyed his family. His loss, Eli said. She looked at him then, quick, surprised, not by the sentiment. By the plainness of it, the lack of ceremony. Yes, she said, after a moment, his loss. The wind went on. Outside something knocked over, a feed bucket probably, rolling away across the hard pack, and neither of them moved to check it. I'm not afraid of Cutter, Nayland said. Not bragging, not performing, just cataloging, I know. I'm afraid of what happens if he gets the documents. She looked at the barn wall like she was looking through it. 15 people died because Harlan Greer wanted my father's people gone from their land. 15. A beat. Nobody has answered for that. Nobody knows the shape of it yet. What's in those papers is the shape of it. We'll get them to someone who can use them. People like Greer have long hands. Marshall Ord in town is a straight man. I've known him 7 years. He looked at her. He's not going to like what's in those papers, but he'll see they go somewhere real. She held his gaze for a moment. You'd do that, she said. Ride to town, make that case. Yes. Why? He thought about how he'd answered the first time she'd asked why. How he'd said, I don't know yet. How he'd meant it. Because Greer let 15 people die and let my wife and daughter die and has been sleeping fine in Abilene while I've been building fence posts. His voice was even. Not angry. Past angry. Something that had been anger once and had aged into something colder and clearer. And because the only way that means anything, any of it, is if someone does something about it while they still can. Nalin was quiet for a moment. I was starting to think there wasn't any space left for me, she said. That's what 3 months of running does. You start to believe what the running says about you. She paused. That you don't fit, that there's no place with room for what you are. Eli looked at the barn floor. I've thought something like that, he said. I know after Sarah and Clara, I know. Neither of them filled in the rest of it. The wind pushed against the barn walls, and the horses shifted, and the lamp on the center post swayed slightly in the draft. It's not true, she said. He looked up. She was looking at him directly, not softly, not gently, just directly. That there's no space for what you are, she said. It's not true, he held her gaze. No, he said. I don't think it is. The wind went on all night, they stayed in the barn. Not talking much after that. Just, present, the horses eventually settled, the lamp burned low. At some point Eli fell asleep sitting on the bucket with his back against the stall post. And when he woke the lamp was out, and grey morning light was coming in under the barn door, and Nalin was sitting across the aisle still awake, watching the light come in, and she didn't say anything about the fact that he'd been asleep for 4 hours, and she hadn't. She just stood up and opened the barn door, and the morning came in. Fen came that evening, not with the others. Without them, Eli was on the porch when he heard hoofbeats on the south approach. Not the main road, the back trail that wound up from the lower pasture. Slow hoofbeats, deliberate, the way you ride when you want someone to hear you coming. He stood up. Nalin appeared in the barn doorway. Fen came through the gate with both hands visible, no rifle in the scabbard, pistol holstered. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, which was probably true, and like he was making the worst or best decision of his life and hadn't decided yet which it was. He stopped about 15 feet out. I'm not here with them, he said. I can see that. Fen looked at Nalin. Then back at Eli. Cutter's planning to move tomorrow night. Not a conversation this time. He swallowed. He's going to fire the barn and take her in the confusion. He figures you'll be busy with the fire. Eli said nothing. Waited. I'm telling you because Fen stopped. Started again. Cutter owes me money. 3 months of work and he's paid me half of what we agreed. He said it like a man who had rehearsed this and was embarrassed by the rehearsal. I figure, the way I see it, you survive this, you can tell Marshall Ord I helped. Maybe that counts for something. Not nobility. Not a sudden awakening of conscience. Just a man who'd been cheated and had found a way to make the cheating mean something. Eli looked at him for a long moment. Cutter know you're here? No, he'll know you told us. When we're ready for him. Fen swallowed again. I know. Where will you go? North. Got a cousin in Colorado. He shifted in the saddle. I'm done with Cutter. I was done before this. Nalin spoke from the doorway. Who else does Cutter have? Just Dutch. And Dutch is half useless. He drinks too much and gets loud. What time tomorrow night? After dark. He said he'd wait until the lamp went out in the cabin. Nalin looked at Eli. Eli looked at Fen. Go to your cousin, he said. Stay off the main road for a week. Fen looked. Relieved was too simple a word. Like a man who'd been carrying a rock for a long time and finally found somewhere to set it down. Not comfortable. Not happy, just lighter. He turned his horse and rode back the way he came. Eli waited until the hoofbeats faded. He might be lying, Nalin said. He might be. If Cutter sent him to get information, then Cutter knows we'll be ready. Eli looked at the empty south trail, which we would have been anyway. Nalin considered that. Came out of the barn doorway and stood in the yard. Looked at the sky. The stars were coming out, early, the way they did when the air was dry. We can't just wait here, she said. No, if Cutter fires the barn, he controls the situation. We're reacting instead of choosing. Yes, so we choose. She turned to look at him. I go to town tomorrow morning. Take the documents to your martial ord. Make the formal record before Cutter moves. I'll go with you. No, firm, not harsh. I need you here. If Cutter's watching, both of us leaving puts the horses and the property at risk. He might move early. She paused. And Fen might be lying. One of us needs to stay in case this is exactly what it looks like. He didn't like it. She could see he didn't like it. I've been moving through this territory alone for 3 months, she said. I can ride to a town and find a lawman. Cutter is here, watching this property. He won't expect me to move first. She was patient but direct. This is the right call, you know it is. He looked at her. The thing was, she was right. He knew she was right. He knew it the same way you know a thing when your brain has already finished the reasoning and is just waiting for your chest to catch up. Take the bay mare, he said. She's the fastest. I know which one she is. Take the rifle, too. I already planned to. Nalin, I'll be back before dark. She held his gaze steady. I know what I'm doing. He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. She went back into the barn to prepare. And Eli stood in the yard and looked at the stars and tried not to think about the feeling in the bottom of his chest. The one he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not exactly worry. He'd worried plenty about weather and water and the kind of ordinary disasters that come with working land alone. This was different. This was the specific feeling of caring whether someone came back, which was inconvenient and terrifying. And also true. He went inside and checked the rifles. She was gone before sunrise. He heard the bay mare's hoofbeats fade south, and then there was nothing but the land and the early light and the coffee going cold on the porch. He checked the trap lines, both intact. No fresh sign of boots on the east approach. The west was clean. He walked the full perimeter of the property in the thin morning light, reading the ground the way she'd been teaching him to read it. Heel strike depth told you weight, stride told you speed, the way the gravel scattered told you direction. No one had been close last night. Good. He came back to the yard and looked north, looked at the ridge where Cutter had sat on his grey horse and watched them work. Empty now. Which was its own kind of information. He went to the barn and fed the horses. He went to the cabin and sat at the table with the unopened bottle of rye and the folded paper with Harlan Greer's name on it, and thought about what it meant. All of it, the sum of it, how a man could sit in an Abilene store and make a decision that took 2 weeks to kill a woman and a child and set off 3 years of a man slowly going hollow, and then how that same man could reach forward in time with hired hands and try to erase the evidence of the second thing he'd done. And how that chain of decisions had brought a woman named Nalin to a creek bed in New Mexico, and brought Eli Sharp out of the cottonwoods because he couldn't make himself go back. He looked at the bottle, left it, stood up, because there was work to do, because the horses needed water, because the fence wasn't going to fix itself, because this was how you got through a morning when someone you'd known for 4 days had ridden south alone, and you had no way to know when you'd hear hoofbeats on the south trail again. Work and wait, and be ready. He picked up the mallet and went back to the fence. The land spread out around him. Big and dry and very old, he drove the post in straight this time. The morning felt wrong before he could name why. Not wrong like weather, wrong like a held breath. Eli had been up since before light, checked the east trap line, walked the corral fence, made coffee and left it on the porch without drinking it. The horses stood in the corral without moving, the way animals go still when they've made a decision and are waiting for the world to catch up. He stood on the porch and watched the south trail until the trail blurred. She'd been gone since before sunrise. 11 miles to town, an hour and a half on the bay mare, find Marshal Ord, present the documents, make the formal record. Come back, 4 hours, maybe 5 if Ord needed things explained twice. It was past noon, which was fine. Towns had delays built into them. Old men behind desks, paperwork that needed 3 signatures when 2 would do. 5 hours meant nothing, except the horses were standing wrong. He went inside and cleaned the rifle, then cleaned it again. Then he sat at the table and looked at the bottle of rye and thought about how a man could spend 3 years learning not to care about anything and then, in 4 days, forget every single skill he'd built. Because he was an idiot, he stood up and walked the perimeter for the 3rd time. Nothing, clean. Both trap lines intact. The east approach undisturbed. The west the same. He came back to the yard and stood in the heat and looked south. Come on. He didn't say it out loud, but he thought it with enough force that it should have counted for something. It didn't. He went back to the fence. The shot came at 2 in the afternoon, single crack, southwest direction. Too close to be a hunter, too deliberate to be an accident. Eli went still in the middle of the yard and listened. Nothing, then another, different angle, closer, and then the smell, not the dry dust smell of the yard, not the horse and hay smell of the barn. Something sharper, darker, smoke. He turned. The storage shed behind the barn. The back wall caught, flames climbing fast up the dry wood, the stacked winter feed inside turning it into something that wasn't going to be put out. Not by one man with a bucket. Not today, he understood immediately. The fire wasn't the point. The fire was the move. Designed to put him behind the barn, facing the wrong direction. Back to the yard, he spun around and ran. Dutch was in the middle of the yard, on foot, pistol up, sober, which was worse than drunk. Sober Dutch was grievance without noise. "Where is she?" Dutch said. Not a greeting, a demand. Like Eli had taken something that belonged to him and he wanted it itemized and returned. "Gone. Gone where? Away. Away from Cutter. Away from you." Dutch's face went through its usual motion, reddening, tightening, building towards something loud. Cutter's going to be real unhappy about this. Where is Cutter? A smile, not a good one. Handling something. And there it was, not here, not in the yard, not facing Eli with Dutch as the main act. Handling something. Eli's chest went cold and quiet the way it went before bad things happened. Not fear, not panic. Just the particular silence of a man doing math he doesn't want to finish. Nalin was south, on the trail. Alone. Cutter was south. Dutch who couldn't be trusted with anything that required patience. Dutch was here because he was the distraction. The fire was the distraction. And Eli standing in this yard having this conversation was exactly what Cutter had needed him to do. "The barn," Eli said. "Already checked the barn." Dutch raised the pistol a fraction. "Tell me where she was taking those papers." "Town? To see Ord? Tell me." Eli looked at the pistol, looked at Dutch's face, and he knew with the certainty of a man who has read a lot of faces in bad moments, that Dutch was going to pull the trigger whether he answered or not. Not because Cutter told him to, because Dutch needed this to end with him winning something. Anything. The week had taken too much from him and he needed to take something back. "You know where she went," Eli said. He kept his voice flat, factual, which means Cutter knows, which means Cutter is already on that trail right now. "He didn't tell you that, did he?" He watched Dutch's face, the flicker. "You're not here to get information. You're here so you don't get in his way." Dutch's jaw moved. "He used you to clear the yard," Eli said. The pistol came up fully, then the shot came. Not from Dutch, from the south rifle caliber. Then silence, then a second shot. Dutch heard it too. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt. The beginning of understanding what he'd been a part of. The look of a man who has been a tool and has just now figured out the shape of the tool he was. Eli hit him. Not a plan. Not technique. Just a right hand from a man with 3 years of fence post behind it and something specific in his chest that needed to go somewhere outside his body. Dutch went down. He stayed down. Eli stepped over him, grabbed the rifle from the dirt where it had landed and ran. The south trail was empty. He ran it anyway, full speed, not thinking, not calculating distances or odds or outcomes. Just running toward the thing he'd been avoiding thinking about since he watched her ride south before sunrise. "Come on. Come on. Come on." The trail curved through scrub brush and opened onto a flat stretch where the ground was hard and the sight lines were long. He saw the bay mare first, 50 yards off the trail, standing with her head down, reins on the ground. Not running, just standing with the particular stillness of an animal that has decided to wait. He slowed, looked. Nalin was on the ground 12 feet from the trail. On her left side, the Winchester still in her right hand. He covered the distance, down on his knees beside her. No thought. His hands moving before he'd decided to move them. Checking breathing first, that was always first. Everything else was secondary to that one thing. She was breathing. He stayed there for a moment with just that. Just the fact of her chest rising and falling, just that. Then he got to work. The wound was in her left side, low on the ribs. His hands ran the check he'd been trained to run 20 years ago, the one that lived in the hands even when the mind had been trying to forget it. Entry point. He turned her slightly, exit wounds, which was better. No bone involvement that he could feel. No sucking sound when she pulled air in, bleeding, but not the kind that counted in minutes. Nalin, nothing. He pressed 2 fingers to her jaw. Her pulse was there, steady enough. Nalin louder now, her eyes opened. Unfocused first, ceiling of sky and dry air, then with a visible deliberate effort, she found him. Cutter, she said. Her voice was dry and very calm. I know. Came from the north side of the trail, behind the ridge. She breathed. Controlled, I fired back. His horse went right. Okay. The documents. Her right hand still wrapped around the Winchester, moved toward her jacket. Left breast pocket. Still here. He put his hand over hers gently on the rifle. I know, he said. She looked at him. Can you ride? He said. Yes. Don't be brave about it. Her mouth moved. Almost something. I'm not being brave, I said yes. He got the bay mare. The animal stood perfectly still while he lifted Nalin, the full weight of her, which was considerable, which required everything he had, and got her settled in the saddle. She grabbed the horn with her right hand and held. He swung up behind her. I can ride alone, she said. You could, he said. But you're not going to, she didn't argue, which told him more about how she was feeling than her yes had. They rode back. He got her into the cabin. She started to say something about the barn being fine. He could hear it forming, the practical objection, the efficient solution, and then she didn't finish the sentence because she'd assessed something internally and decided not to spend the energy. She let him steer her to the cot. She sat on it, then lay back, then was still. He built the fire low and got water boiling and found the kit. It was on the shelf above the fireplace, where he'd put it 3 years ago. Canvas wrapped. He hadn't opened it since the morning he'd decided he was done with what was inside it. He'd thought about getting rid of it a dozen times. He never had. He opened it now. His hands moved without hesitation. He noticed it briefly, like noticing the temperature of a room when you walk in. His hands were not shaking. They knew exactly what to do and they did it. He cleaned the wound, properly, thoroughly, the way it needed to be done, which was not quickly or gently but accurately. She came back to consciousness twice during it. The first time she grabbed his forearm, hard, not panic, grounding. He said nothing and kept working. After a moment she let go. The second time, how bad? Manageable, that's not. 2 ribs. Bruised or cracked? I can't tell without more than I have here. Wound is clean, no organ involvement. She looked at the ceiling. Okay, he confirmed. She went under again. He stitched the wound closed with the suture kit. Steady hands. Clean lines. The kind of work that came from doing something so many times that your body remembered it, even when you'd tried to make it forget. He tied off the last stitch, sat back on the stool, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He stayed like that for a moment. Clara, 14 months old and her hands always moving. The morning he'd realized he wasn't going to be able to fix what was happening to her. His hands shaking so badly he'd had to put them flat on the table. Sarah watching him from the doorway and understanding before he said anything, because Sarah always understood things before he said them. He'd thought, that morning, that if his hands couldn't hold steady when it counted, then what exactly was the point of the hands? What was the point of any of it? He let out one long breath, opened his eyes. She was breathing. The wound was closed. The work was done. You don't get to choose when you're needed. You only get to choose whether you show up. He wrapped the bandage, checked the tension, checked it again, stood up, moved to the window, and looked out at the yard. Dutch was still in the dirt, sitting up now, both hands on his jaw, looking at nothing in particular, and Dade Cutter was on the porch. Not standing, sitting on the top step with his left arm held close to his side, blood at the shoulder, old enough to be darkening, going brown at the edges of the tear in his coat. His rifle was leaning against the rail 6 feet away. His pistol was holstered. He was just sitting there. Eli stood at the cabin window and looked at him for a moment. Then he went to the door and opened it. They looked at each other. She alive, Cutter said. Yes. Cutter's face moved. Just slightly, just enough. His jaw set and his eyes went somewhere briefly that wasn't the yard, somewhere inward, somewhere else, and then came back. How bad, he said. She'll be up in a week. Cutter nodded once, looked down at his arm. Your shed's gone, he said. I know. Barn held. The horses that broke out went south, probably stopped at the Henderson property. Eli stepped out onto the porch, leaned against the rail, looked at the shed, which was now just a frame of charred posts with smoke coming off it in thin gray wisps. Why didn't you take her on the trail? Eli said. Cutter kept looking at his arm. What? You had position. She didn't see you until the second shot. You had a clean first shot and you didn't use it. Eli kept his voice even. I want to know why. Cutter was quiet. The yard was quiet. Dutch had stopped holding his jaw and was now just sitting in the dirt, looking like a man whose entire week had been a series of conclusions he hadn't wanted to reach. "I've done this work a long time," Cutter said finally. 18 years. He stopped there, like that was the whole answer. Then started again. "You see a lot of people. You learn to read them fast, you have to, or you make mistakes. And most of the time," he paused, "most of the time what you're reading is fear, how much of it they have, how they carry it, what they'll do when it gets bad enough." He looked at his hand. She wasn't afraid. "I know," Eli said. "Not the way people aren't afraid when they're pretending, He stopped again. His jaw worked once. "My daughter died 4 years ago. Fever. She was 22. He said it the way you say something you've said to yourself 100 times, but haven't said out loud in a long while. Flat. Not performing grief. Just stating a fact that happened to be the most important fact in his life. She had the same way of standing. Like nothing that was happening to her had any authority over who she was." He looked up, met Eli's eyes directly. "I couldn't do it clean," he said. "She saw me first." Eli held his gaze. "Who hired you after Greer died?" Eli said. Cutter's eyes shifted. Not surprise, recalculation. "How'd you know Greer was dead?" "Because you told us his name yourself. When you came to the yard alone. You don't give information away unless you're past needing to protect it." Cutter was quiet for a moment. Then something that wasn't quite a smile moved across his face. "Greer's lawyer, name of Aldous Webb. He's handling the estate out of Abilene. Figured the documents were a liability for the inheritance, civil claims, land disputes, all of it." He shifted his arm slightly. "Hired me at half what Greer had promised. Cash up front. Would you testify to that? In front of Ord?" "Yes." Cutter looked out at the mountains. His jaw moved, the habit of a man who thinks with his whole face when he believes no one is watching. He'd been alone a long time. He'd probably forgotten how much he gave away. "That ends my work in this territory," he said. "Yes. Might end it everywhere word gets around, I imagine it does." Cutter looked at him, direct. Measuring. "You're asking me to walk away from the only work I've known for 18 years. I'm asking you to stop doing the part of it that brought you to this yard." Eli met his eyes. "That's a smaller ask than the other thing." Cutter sat with that, Dutch said from the dirt. "I want it on the record that nobody told me most of this." Both men looked at him. Dutch pointed at his jaw. "Also, I think my jaw is broken." "Your jaw is not broken," Eli said. "How do you know?" "Because you're talking." Dutch considered this. "It feels broken. It feels bruised. You're not a doctor." "A beat." "I was," Eli said. Dutch stared at him, then looked at Cutter. Cutter looked back at Dutch with the expression of a man who had decided that whatever Dutch was feeling right now was entirely Dutch's own problem. Dutch put his hand back on his jaw and looked at the ground. Marshal Ord arrived an hour later. He came up the south trail at a trot with one deputy behind him. He stopped at the gate and took in the yard the way a practical man takes in a scene, slowly, left to right, assembling the story from its components without rushing to conclusions. Charred shed, broken corral corner, Dutch in the dirt, Cutter on the porch with a bad arm, Eli standing in the middle of it all with dried blood on his hands. "Ellie," Ord said. "Walt." Ord looked at Cutter. "Dade Walter, you took a bullet." "I took a bullet," Cutter confirmed. "There's a distinction there, but I'll let it go." Ord looked at Dutch. Dutch raised one hand from his jaw in a gesture that meant nothing specific. "Someone going to tell me what happened," Ord said. "Come inside," Eli said. "There's someone you need to hear from first." Nayland was awake. She'd pulled herself up against the headboard in the time he'd been outside. Slowly, he could see the cost of it in the set of her jaw, but up. The documents were in her lap, sorted. She'd gone through them while he'd been in the yard, organized them in whatever order made the most sense for a man who'd need to understand them quickly. She looked at Ord the way she looked at everyone, steady, patient, waiting to find out what kind of man he was. Ord came through the door and took his hat off. He didn't announce himself, didn't introduce his authority, just came in and took his hat off the way a man does when he's been raised to take his hat off indoors, when it's a reflex so deep it doesn't require a reason. Nayland's eyes moved to the hat, back to his face. "Marshal," she said. "Ma'am." He looked at her carefully. At the bandage, at the papers in her lap, at the way she was sitting, straight back despite everything. "You're hurt." "I'll live. Can you tell me what those are?" She held them out. He crossed to the chair by the table and sat down. Took the papers, read the first page, read it again, turned to the second page. His face changed, not dramatically, not like a man performing revelation. Just a slow internal shift, the way a scale moves when weight is added to it. He read through to the last page. Set them on his knee. Nobody said anything. Outside, Dutch was telling Ord's deputy something that the deputy was receiving with minimal sympathy. The deputy's horse made occasional sounds of agreement. Harlan Greer, Ord said. Yes, Nalin said. I knew him. Knew of him. I know. I didn't know this about him. Nobody did. She paused. That was the point. Ord looked at the papers on his knee. Your father documented all of this. My father was careful. He understood what would happen if he wasn't. And what happened anyway? Not a question. A statement. An acknowledgement. Nalin held his gaze. What happened anyway, she said. Ord picked up the papers again. Read one more page. Then set them down with the deliberateness of a man who is deciding something while he still has room to decide it. These documents will start something, he said. I want you to understand that. Legal proceedings, challenges from the estate, men who were part of this operation who are still living and have resources. He looked at her directly. It will take time, possibly years, I know. Greer is gone, the primary person is gone. Her voice was even, not resigned, just accurate. But the record doesn't go with him. What happened to those 15 people happened whether or not the man who ordered it is still alive. She looked at the papers in his hands. I'm not asking for anything dramatic, Marshal. I'm asking for those papers to be received and held somewhere they can't be destroyed. That's what I'm asking. Ord looked at her for a long moment. Not measuring her, he'd already done that when he walked in. He was deciding whether he deserved to be in the same room as what she was asking, which was a different thing entirely. That I can do, he said. Today, right now. He reached into his coat for the forms he carried. And Nalin, who had been moving for 3 months, who had covered 300 miles of territory alone, who had carried the papers through mud and heat in the hands of men who wanted them gone, let out one slow breath. Barely visible, just the chest falling and holding. Eli saw it. He looked away and let her have it privately. The legal business took another 30 minutes. Ord wrote in his careful, cramped hand, asked questions. Nalin answered them. Eli stood near the door and stayed out of the way, which was the most useful thing he could do. At one point, Ord asked about Cutter. He fired on her, Eli said. I know. Ord didn't look up from his writing. I also know he didn't finish it when he had the chance. And I know he's been sitting on that porch for the better part of an hour when he could have ridden north and been into the next territory before I arrived. He dipped the pen. I'll talk to him. He has information about Greer's lawyer. That's useful. He knows it's useful. That's why he stayed. Ord looked up at that, considered it, looked back down and kept writing. When the forms were done, he blotted them and folded them into his coat with the careful movements of a man who understood that paper was the most fragile and most permanent thing in the world. He stood up, put his hat on, looked at Nalin. I'll need you in Hatch when this goes to a judge. Might be 2 months, might be 6. I'll be there, she said. He nodded. Then he looked at Eli. Something passed between them that wasn't a question but was close to one. Eli looked back. She'll be there, he said. Ord went outside. Dutch left with the deputy, not in irons, not under guard exactly, but beside the deputy in the deliberate way of a man who understands that right now compliance is the only currency he has left. He came past the porch on the way to his horse and stopped. He didn't look at Nalin, he looked at Eli. And in Dutch's face, underneath the bruising and the dried blood and the exhaustion of a week he hadn't been built for, there was something that wasn't an apology but occupied the same general territory. An acknowledgement that he'd been handed a direction and followed it without looking at where it pointed. Eli nodded once. Dutch walked to his horse, rode south with the deputy without looking back. Ord and Cutter talked on the porch for 40 minutes. Eli stayed inside. Not because he wasn't interested, but because Nalin had closed her eyes, and he wasn't going to leave the cabin while she was sleeping in it. He sat on the stool near the fireplace and listened to the low murmur of 2 men negotiating the shape of a thing on the porch outside. At some point Nalin said, without opening her eyes, "You're watching me. I'm watching the fire. The fire is behind you." He looked at her. She hadn't opened her eyes. She was almost smiling, almost. "Go check on them," she said. "I'll be here when you come back." He went to the door, stopped. "I know," she said, still without opening her eyes. He went out. Ord was standing. Cutter was still sitting on the step, his bad arm in a makeshift sling that Eli had fashioned from a feed sack earlier without discussing it. The two men had reached some kind of arrangement. He could feel the settled quality in the air between them, the way a room feels after an argument has been resolved, and both parties are tired but not unhappy. "He'll come to Hatch," Ord said to Eli. "Testify about Webb's arrangement. That closes the chain. Greer to Webb to Cutter. With the documents, that's enough for a federal claim on the land." "What does he get?" Eli said. "He doesn't hang." Ord said it plainly, which, given what I could build against him, is a reasonable exchange. He looked at Cutter. "He knows that." Cutter said nothing. He was looking at the mountains. Ord picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the rail. "Need anything else, you know where I am." "Thank you, Walt." Ord walked to his horse, mounted. Looked back once with the expression of a man who has done enough for one day, but knows the day isn't what's going to cost him. It's all the days after, when the paperwork becomes hearings and the hearings become a thing that people with money and lawyers will try very hard to make go away. He rode south. Eli and Cutter stood on the porch in the late afternoon light. "I'll need to leave tomorrow," Cutter said. "Get this looked at." He meant the arm. "There's a doctor in Hatch. Better than what I can do here." "You did fine. I did enough." Cutter looked at the arm, then at the mountains, then at the shed. Just a charred frame now, the smoke gone thin and pale. "I built things once," he said. "Before this work. Furniture, mostly. Chairs and tables. Good ones." He said it the same way he'd said everything, flat, factual, like he was reading a ledger. "Might go back to that. That's a skill that keeps," Eli said. "That's what I was thinking." He turned to look at Eli. "She's going to be trouble. I know. The good kind, I know that too." Cutter stood up from the step. Slowly. The arm made it awkward, but he didn't ask for help and Eli didn't offer it. They both understood that some things you do yourself or you don't do at all. He walked to his horse, checked the cinch one-handed with the proficiency of a man who had been doing everything one-handed for the past few hours and had adapted. He put his foot in the stirrup. Stopped. She would have made it back on her own. He said it to the saddle horn. "If I'd taken that shot clean, I mean, she'd have made it back from that too." He put his weight up. Settled. "That kind of person?" "I know," Eli said. Cutter nodded once. Rode north without looking back. The evening arrived the way evenings do when the work is finished and there's nothing left to manage. Not with ceremony, not with announcement, just the light going long and golden across the yard, the mountains going from brown to purple to dark, the first stars showing over the eastern ridge one at a time, and then all at once. Eli fed the horses, fixed the prop on the corral corner, not a real repair, just enough to hold until he could get the post out and reset it properly. Dragged the worst of the shed debris away from the barn wall so it wouldn't be a fire risk if the wind shifted. Small things, practical things. The ordinary work of a man putting his property back in order after something had come through it. He was on his third trip to the debris pile when he heard the cabin door. Slow footsteps. Careful. The sound of someone managing pain with patience and not making noise about it. He didn't turn around. He heard her settle onto the porch step. He finished the trip to the debris pile and came back and sat down beside her. Not close. Enough. She had the blanket from the cot around her shoulders. She was looking at the mountains. He looked at the mountains too. They didn't say anything for a while. The air had done the thing New Mexico air does at evening. Gone from furnace hot to genuinely cool in the space of 20 minutes, like the land exhaling. The stars were serious now. Not the tentative early evening kind. The full dark kind, wall to wall. The kind that only happen when you're far from everything, and the air is clean and the night is just the night. "Your shed," Nalin said, "needed rebuilding anyway, the fence post. I'll reset it this week, the 2 horses that went south. Henderson will keep them for me until I ride over." She turned her head and looked at him. He kept looking at the mountains. "You're not going to let me apologize," she said. "There's nothing to apologize for. I made a tactical decision that had costs. You made the right call." He said it without softening it. "If you'd stayed, Cutter would have taken you from a defended position, which is harder but not impossible. Going to town was right. What happened on the trail was him adjusting. I should have, Nalin." He looked at her. "You did the right thing. The costs are mine to carry. That's what I chose when I stepped out of those cottonwoods." She held his gaze, then looked back at the mountains. "My father used to say," she said, "that the ground holds everything, every person who walked on it. Every decision, Everything that was done and everything that couldn't be undone. She was quiet for a moment. He meant it as comfort, that nothing is lost. Did it work? When I was small, she pulled the blanket tighter. When I got older, I started thinking about what that meant. That the ground holds the bad things too. The 15 people. My father's name being destroyed, all of it, just sitting there in the dirt, permanent. And now, she thought about it. Now I think he was right, she said. But not only about the past. The ground holds what hasn't happened yet too. The things that are still possible. She looked at the yard, at the broken fence, the charred shed, the scuffed dirt of the afternoon's work and its consequences. I think he meant both things. I just couldn't hear the second one until now. He looked at the yard too, and saw what she was seeing. Not that dinge, but the land underneath it. The land that had been here before the shed was built, and would be here after the shed was rebuilt, and would hold whatever came after that too. My daughter used to put her palm flat on the window glass when it was cold outside, he said. Every morning, just to feel the temperature. Like she was taking the measure of the day before it started. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way true things come out when you stop managing them. Whole and plain. Nalin didn't say anything for a moment. Smart child, she said, yes. The stars went on. Neither of them moved to go inside. There was no dramatic thing that happened next. No declaration, no moment that announced itself as significant. They just sat there, the two of them, in the cooling air, on the porch of a ranch that had seen one very long and very complicated week, and was still standing. At some point, Nalin said, "There's 40 acres north of here, my father's deed. I've never seen it. I know. I'd like to see it. When you're healed enough to ride, that's not a long time." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. He looked at her. The kind of look that doesn't ask anything and doesn't answer anything, and somehow contains everything that needs to be said for now, which is all you ever get, the now. The next hour and the hour after and whatever the land has been saving up to show you. Equal, she said. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes. Equal, he said. She nodded once, like that was the whole agreement and they both knew it. She looked back at the mountains. He looked back at the mountains. The night came in around them like it had been doing out here for 1,000 years, unhurried, complete, full of the particular silence of land that is big enough to hold whatever you bring to it. Eli Sharp did not want the day to end. He didn't name it, didn't examine it, just felt it sitting in his chest like something that had been cold for 3 years and was warm now, and left it there and let the evening do what evenings do. The mountains went dark, the stars held, the ground held everything.